Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. Welcome to the Cathedral of Prog. Join us on a journey that will take us from Genesis to Revelation via the dark side of the moon. Over 300 different band members, 300 million albums sold, over 34.7 billion chord changes, more hay bales, dry ice, airborne pigs than a David Copperfield Christmas special, all done on a farm. Welcome to the sublime and, yes, ridiculous world of progressive rock.
30 years ago, dinosaurs ruled the earth, for they were the beasts of progressive rock.
Welcome to our little home.
This is where we live.
This is where we live and listen to prog rock.
Come inside, the show's about to start. Guaranteed to blow your head apart.
But before all that, there was this.
I like it, I like it. I like the way you run your fingers through my hair.
The 3-minute pop song ruled the charts, but the doors of perception were about to be opened.
Let me come in when your mama
And I'll take the drug now.
An hour and a half later, there were definite effects.
They're talking about things that are a bit new, you know, and they're talking about things which people don't really know too much about yet.
I certainly got stoned in 1965 and pretty much stayed stoned until 1986 or something.
Join in a happening.
Planet Britain was on a trip through the swinging 60s. Men dressed as women, and women didn't dress at all. Leading the way, who else? In 1967, with Sgt. Pepper, the Beatles offered up the first sacrifice on the altar of prog. Although not strictly a concept album, it confused enough young men to make them meet, form bands and indulge each other. Prog was born.
I think the word that probably best sums it up is experimental.
Avant-garde, anything to do with doing something that you hope is refreshing and new.
But also musically, lots of changes in pace.
I think prog rock really was connected to early technology.
Like the gong, the mellotron, a proto-synthesizer that was sort of an orchestra in a drinks cabinet, the double-bladed axe, your basic flute, and of course, the moped helmet.
Oh, it's fucking awful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about right.
It was exciting. It was energetic music.
I've never, to this day, experienced such a rush of emotion of being pulverised.
A flower?
People at that time, you know, they hadn't seen anyone dressing up in that way with music.
Yes, this was progressive rock, a 70s musical landscape dominated by concept albums about Dungeons and Dragons, aliens and geese, featuring hour-long song cycles with week-long instrumental solos. Well, it felt like it. But by the end of the decade, there was a whole new generation who wanted to get back to basics. The 3-minute pop song with attitude. The meteor of punk had arrived to scorch the earth clean.
Prog died, big time.
Oh, shit. Tonight we cast our minds back through the mists of time and excavate our progressive rock top 10 based on eons spent in the UK album charts.
Now, on what better steed than to commence our journey across the shifting sands of progressive rock than the ship of the desert itself?
And of course, some people who are very sensitive can actually smell it as well. In fact, I'm picking something up right now. It's a gorilla. No, it's a dromedary. It's a camel.
Guildford, 1971. A rock and roll desert except for a small oasis of prog and a three-headed creature lacking one vital organ.
We all thought about it and said, well, you know, we need a keyboard player. So we put an advert in the Melody Maker, and I think Pete Bardens was the only one that answered it.
We hooked up, got together, had a rehearsal, and I think it was love at first sight. I like to feel that was the case. I'm sure it was.
Evenings of, you know, sitting in pubs, you know, just gibbering really, you know, coming up with the most stupid names you could think of. And then I think Andy came up with Camel.
And we all thought, yeah, that's quite nice. They're funky animals. And the sort of desert imagery appealed to us.
And so the beast was born. But what appealed to the band's manager was the possibility of product endorsement from a well-known brand of fags.
The sleeve of Mirage was the Camel cigarette packet. Well, the European Camel cigarettes loved it. You know, they said, oh, this is fantastic. And all the while, the band were very uncomfortable with it.
It's not a very good association, you know, music and lung cancer.
Especially when I think 5 or 6 shady guys came down to the studio from Camel cigarettes.
They were saying things like, well, I think this should be called a pack of 20. You know, that hardly sounds like a song title.
You know, it was just stupid, and we just said, well, I don't think this is going to work out.
With their cigarette sponsorship up in smoke, the band got on with the business of prog. Yes, a concept album. And so, the Snow Goose was hatched. 2 sides of vinyl inspired by a children's book about a bird, but with no vocals.
We all got into this meeting in New York, you know, and told them about the album. Yeah, it's great. One big piece of music, and there, you know, all these faces were...
Despite the misgivings, the album sold millions. Woodwind rocked.
Why were they so successful? Because of, literally because of the music. There was no great image going for them. They had no great lead singer, nobody jumping, no Freddie Mercury, no Mick Jagger.
The Decca publicist, you know, he used to tear his hair out. He said, can't you shave your head, wear gold leotards, do something, you know, say you've been on heroin for a year, you know, anything, you know. And we said, oh no, you know.
Peter Bardens left to twiddle his knobs elsewhere in 1978, so Latimer and Ward were left to come up with a new concept.
We've a couple of tracks from the album tonight. This is the first, Lies.
A concept album about a Japanese soldier on an island.
There's no turning back, nowhere to hide.
1984, and another concept album about the Cold War. And a drag queen. Obvious. By 1992, Andy Latimer was the only original member of the band left.
I was left with nothing, really. I was left with just a name, no band, nothing. And the name, almost at that time, was a curse, too. You know, everybody in England was going, oh, Camel? Oh, dinosaurs, you know.
Andy sold his house, took the proceeds to California, and used the money to establish a .com company to market his own albums to the faithful. His latest, a concept album about a camel in the desert. And it sent the camel tribe wild once more.
Camel. I listen to Andy Latimer. He plays the guitar and makes me cry. No, I tell you what, you take that camera into there.
Yes, the camel caravan still stretches from the West Midlands to the west coast of America, where Andy still lives and conceptualises to this very day. And we think that's groovy, man.
And now for one of the great what-ifs of rock history. Brian Ferry actually auditioned for this band. Picture the scene. Raven black fringe, dinner jacket, suave. Cat's foot, iron claw. Neurosurgeons scream for more at paranoia's poisoned door. I'm not singing that. It's twaddle.
Here, take these. What are they? Salt and mercury, effective against the dark forces.
Everything was dark, hidden, sinister.
Oh, God.
This stuff kind of stomps you into the ground. Kills your dog. And throws you out the house like.
There is always a dark side. For Prog, it was Robert Fripp and King Crimson. In the summer of '69, after only 20 gigs, the West Country Warlocks were invited to play with the Stones in Hyde Park in front of 650,000 people. But the summer of love was over.
Things were changing. It wasn't all sweetness and light.
And when they came out with this first album, it was a bit of a shock to most people. You know, the cover.
The cover. Wow.
In the court of the Crimson King. In the court of the Crimson King blew away both the critics and the other members of the band. By 1972, Fripp's schizoid crew was reduced to just one, himself. A new band was called for. Bill Bruford, fur hat. John Wetton, bass and Burberry. And Jamie Muir, fur coat and lunatic stage antics.
He would climb the PA stacks, in front of a stunned crowd in Preston Civic Hall on a rainy Thursday.
Whirling chains, hitting tuned Domestos bottles.
Blood capsules.
I couldn't believe it. Crikey, metal work the next day. We just started banging things around.
Having caused chaos in classrooms all over Britain, Muir left to join a Tibetan monastery in Scotland. But they soldiered on, recording the album Red, which Kurt Cobain, amongst others, believed to be the greatest album of all time. But for Fripp, the unimaginable was about to happen.
Top of my head blew off. I saw what, if you like, real freedom as a human being is. And at this time, King Crimson was just about poised to be the most successful rock band in Europe.
I just got a phone call one morning from Robert, and he said, I want to take a year off.
So Fripp stomped off to a spiritual retreat for 3 years. In 1978, he returned as a jobbing musician to New York, where amongst other things he recorded Heroes with David Bowie. But by 1981, Crimson were back.
Robert Fripp, its founder guitarist, says King Crimson is a way of doing things. Well, the current way of doing things includes Bill Bruford back with the band on drums.
Wait for it, Robert had appeared again. Hey!
With ex-Talking Heads man Adrian Belew on vocals and Tony Levin on Thing, some fans were confused.
I didn't recognise it at all as King Crimson when I first heard it. Where's the mellotron? What's this blokey going on about?
I didn't know what to think.
And then the penny drops, then you get what it's about, and then you recognise it as King Crimson.
I wish you were here to see it!
Many years ago I gave up trying to predict whether there in fact would be a King Crimson at breakfast the next morning or not. It was one of those jobs you enjoyed in the evening, and if it was there tomorrow, next week, or with an album in a year's time, you were grateful.
Even more unpredictably, Crimson are still going, as is Fripp, with his lovely young wife, punk diva and TV presenter, Toyah.
Who's doing the washing up? Robert and I have been married... How long have we been married?
13 short years, dear.
13 short years, and we've worked very hard to keep it as spontaneous as possible.
They're mature guys who get erections and want to get there, and they're hungry for it still. And anybody who can manage to still be hungry for it after all this time has to have something going for them.
I like it!
Science fiction, mud, drugs, contemporary dance. This next band had the lot.
Making love, it is imperative to bring all bodies to orgasm simultaneously. You will hear a distant hissing in your ears. You will feel dizzy. You will feel the need to vomit. There will be bleeding from orifices. There will be an ache in the pelvic region.
Hawkwind, the space cadets of Prog, on a 30-year ride across the cosmos, with a name picked from the astral ether. Well, sort of.
The name came about by my sort of rather objectionable habits of coughing and spitting. He's always going clearing his throat, hawking, and farting. Oh, farting as well, I believe. Yes. But there is the, sort of mystical word of better to be the hawk that flies over the forest than the eagle that flies over the mountain.
This is probably the only Hawkwind song you know, the one of the car advert. It's also the only hit of a career that's produced 120 albums and a world shortage of LSD.
Everything in Auckland was drug-related. I mean, when we were relaxed, that was drug-related too, right?
LSD was the new drug, the in vogue drug at the time. Of course, we used to take it, experiment with it and all that. We used to play on it, we had terrible things happening to us when we played.
Well, Dave Brock always used to think he'd bitten his tongue off when he was on acid.
All the audiences were like skeletons and things were melting.
They had this big red bandana as a handkerchief, and he'd get it out and think it was soaked in blood, see?
Drugs, flatulence and a hairy bass player. What madness next? Ah, an Amazonian fertility goddess.
I think I met Stacia at the Isle of Wight festival. She'd said that she'd always wanted to be a dancer, and I thought, well, that sounds good. She's about 6'2", much too big. I introduced her to the band. I said, this great girl who wants to dance. And they say, oh, well, how about if she dances naked?
You went to see Hawkwind because Stacia took her clothes off. And when that top came up, she was a big gal. It was just about the first dawn of lap dancing, was Hawkwind.
So, everyone was off the tits, but was it Prog? Ah.
second album, In Search of Space, which is a concept album about space travellers who land on Earth and become two-dimensional, and they become this piece of vinyl.
After Two-Dimensional Aliens, things got really bizarre. They wrote a hit single, but being Hawkwind, they had no one to sing it.
They tried everybody else, and when nobody else could do it, they finally reluctantly let me try it. And I did it in 3 takes, and it went to number 2, which pissed them off even worse, you know.
It looked like the Hawks were on the cosmic highway to success, but their next interstellar idea blew it, literally.
I had the bomb squad round tearing up my floorboards because we were thought to be dissidents, you know, and dangerous.
And so consequently it was withdrawn from the market because of the bombing, and everything plummeted then, you know.
In 1975, things went from bad to worse. Lemmy was arrested on the Canadian border for the possession of drugs, which earned him more than just a telling off.
The only reason they got me out of jail was because my replacement couldn't show up early enough. He got delayed, so they got me out of jail, and, you know, after all that. Flew me up to Toronto. He went on stage, great show, 4 o'clock in the morning, fired.
The lesson? People in glass houses shouldn't get stoned. Still, Lemmy wasn't the only one to leave. Having helped them surf the new wave, Bob Calvert left in 1979. But the band ploughed on as free festival favourites, the house band at Henge and darlings of the Druids.
We could see the Druids coming in, you know, big on the horn, you know.
The guy who plays Ken Barlow on Coronation Street was actually the arch-druid at the time. We started chanting this mantra, Ken Barlow, Ken Barlow, Ken Barlow, Ken Barlow, Ken Barlow. It was just for a joke, really.
Like Ken Barlow, Hawkwind won't go away. And like Corrie, they're enjoying an anniversary. 30 years celebrated with orchestra music and traditional libations and feasting.
Can I interest you in a hash truffle?
Previous members of the band are all playing tonight. Dave Brock on guitar, Nick Turner on wind, Lemmy on bass, and on breasts, Sam Fox. No, really. Better to be the hawk that flies over the forest than the eagle that flies over the mountain. Right on, mates.
I've got silver machine. I've got silver machine.
We have travelled far, my children, but we have much further to go before nightfall. So let us tarry a while here and refresh ourselves with cool mead from the minibar facility. Cheers. Prithee, welcome back to Prog Rock Top 10. Time now to sling your velvet cloak over an orc. Cheers. While we tell you a story of a group from a land far across the sea who brought us tales of sword and sorcery that caused a wave of deafness and bad moustaches amongst 15-year-old boys in the late 70s.
It's a long way from the maple leaves of Canada to the golden glade of Prog.
Go, go, go.
Well, they do say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and I'm sure if that's so, Led Zeppelin will be knocked out.
Canadian rockers Rush couldn't have cared less, Bob. Geddy Lee, blessed with trousers so tight his voice could crack nuts, met guitarist Alex Lifeson at high school. They loved Led Zeppelin and formed a band in 1968. It just needed a name, dude.
A rush is a, sudden feeling of like chills up your spine kind of thing.
And we thought that it sounded cool, there was a drug connections, and as a 14-year-old kid we thought, yeah, that's cool, wow, yeah.
They had a name, made an album, but carelessly lost their drummer. Just as they were about to go on tour, they needed someone fast. Where to look? Ah, agricultural retail.
Here's this guy who was selling farm equipment in a small town an hour from Toronto.
Big lunky guy, didn't have a shirt on, short hair, he had this little car.
And we kept looking at each other and thinking, this guy kind of looks dorky. I don't know if he's going to really work out.
But mystic tractor salesman Neil Peart was a quick learner, and the ladyboys of Canadian rock were soon on the road with the headmasters of hedonism.
Kiss and Aerosmith really taught us how to behave properly on the road. They were very nice, polite gentlemen, and they never acted untoward, and it was a very wholesome environment.
The tour raised their profile, but not their sales, and spandex and cucumbers aren't exactly prog. But that soon changed. Ah, the concept album. Mind Control and Salvation, all in 40 minutes, in the year 2112.
When we recorded 2112, we had no idea that it would be liked even. We thought it was our last record.
2112 was really the turning point for us.
Overnight, Rush had become high priests in the Temple of Prog. The year was 1976, but Rush would be singing 2112 well into the 90s. And by 1977, our band of goblins and hobbits had crossed Middle-earth and were invading the home of prog. At exactly the same time, a bunch of orcs was sowing the seeds of discontent. But hark, what soft tune breaks through yonder Douglas fir? Ah, 'tis the elven tunesmith.
We were all reading Lord of the Rings and, Isaac Asimov and, reading some sci-fi stuff.
But after defying punk and recording 5 albums of classic prog, our silken-clad Canucks decided to hang up their prog gym.
Continue to do 20-minute sides. Yeah, I know people find that hard to believe.
No, they don't. Rush rolled up their sleeves and wrote a hit single for the 80s. Prog classicists were aghast. Top man jackets, ponytails, the horror. Today, they've all gone solo, but the Rush brand of pragmatic prog survived well into the 90s.
Sometimes it's dark, sometimes it's not so dark, sometimes it's funky, sometimes it's not so funky, and sometimes, it's a train wreck.
Indeed, and across the suburbs of Toronto, usually on a Thursday, there are those who try to capture that elusive sound. This is the Rush tribute band YYZ, playing us out with YYZ.
Thank you very kindly. Good night.
Next, the Zippy, Bungle and Jeffrey of Prog. They were huge. They were wild. They were 3 blokes that had their own lorries.
Keith Emerson, keyboards. Greg Lake, guitar and vocals.
Okay, let's like clear this room.
Carl Palmer, drums and percussion.
One soft one, one hard one. What the use is that? What's that about?
Brian Flowers, personal roadie to the band.
Heavy LP are the quintessential progressive rock act. Absolutely fantastic stuff. Because they just didn't give a damn. That's what's so great about them. They didn't give a damn.
Pull!
Making this music that was bonkers and great.
We decided to have our names painted on the top of the trucks. No one could see it unless you're in a helicopter. I mean, you know, it wasn't like to be flash for the sake of being flash. It was all done with the utmost taste, I think.
They were the richest men in the world. They were rich as Croesus. They were carried around on winged horses with Nubian slave girls, feeding them drugs from a golden plate.
Well, sort of. In the late 60s, Keith Emerson tinkled the ivories for prog pioneers the Nice, but he was thinking of bigger things. He had a vision of how the world should be.
I realised that the three-piece format was working very well. Keyboards, bass, drums. And I wanted to get the best goddamn three-piece in the world.
Keith set to work. Take Greg Lake from King Crimson on bass and vocals. Add Carl Palmer, drummer with the Crazy World of Arthur Brown and Atomic Rooster. Give them a name like a bunch of accountants, and let rip. Well, almost. Still, Keith was holding his end up with a show-stopping prog removal man from hell routine.
My responsibility was to be kind of a frontman instrumentally. But it's very difficult to be a frontman with a 350-pound Hammond organ. But I found a way around that.
Is to put the knives in, leave the knives in it, and they walk off stage, and just a single spot on this unholy noise coming from this Hammond organ with a knife sticking out of it. Now, you know, I'm sure Oasis are pretty good in their own way, but they don't leave knives sticking out of instruments and leave the stage. It was wonderful.
We'd throw knives. That's one of the reasons why I got the gongs, because it was one way of shielding myself in case one of these knives ricocheted out of the box over to the drums, which they did on many occasions.
Carl had the gong, and he had a bell that used to hang here, right? And at one time, so he's doing the drum solo, and at one point, he would take the bell between his teeth and go, and bang the gong with his head. He would do this, honestly. You had a tub around him, you could throw your washing in. He was, and we used to sit and think, wow, he's using his teeth and everything.
Let's wait for Mr. Lake.
Keith Emerson's got all his banks of gear. Carl Palmer's got his gong and this 52-piece drum kit. Greg Lake, hang on, I've only got this guitar. I want what everybody else has got. So what does he do? He gets himself a £2,000 Persian carpet.
He stood on this carpet and people liked it because he was the only guy who ever stood on his own carpet.
LP were the behemoths of Prog, but like all great civilizations, took one step too far.
Together, you know, it's kind of bizarre.
When former Accrington farm worker John Anderson met posh choir boy Chris Squire, the answer was yes. The band leaders found a guitarist, Steve Howe, and scored a hit album. But there was still one star missing from the galaxy of yes.
I got together with John and I said, well, there's this guy that's becoming big in England. There's this hotshot keyboard player. Maybe we should get him, you know.
With Rick Wakeman on board, the band went stratospheric. The following two albums sold millions.
Testifying, mutilated, armies gather near.
But for the next album, John decided he wanted to record in the country. In the woods. In a tent. Blimey.
Steve and Chris wanted to record in town, so we had a compromise. And the compromise that we would be in town, but...
What are you going to sing?
Well,
I know what you're going to sing. You're going to sing a lullaby, but why a lullaby?
Because I've always been a fan of a great band called Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Look at that moon shine so bright.
And tonight he smiles, especially for you. Sleep tight.
It was totally excessive. It really was. I mean, we burned ourselves out. We spent every penny we had doing what we believed in. And I wouldn't change it for a heartbeat.
To the Italians, they were si. To the French, oui. To Kurt and Heidi, ja. To the enigmatic people of Tibet, casa. But in any language, they meant full-on prog lunacy.
You look over there, you'll see Chris. Just move over there. That's Christopher.
Well, I expect you're wondering why we're here tonight, quite honestly.
Back in swinging London in 1969, men met and formed bands.
Well, Chris was in the bar that I was working in, and I was cleaning up the glasses, so we started chatting, and 30 years later, we're still together. You know, it's kind of bizarre.
When former Accrington farm worker John Anderson met posh choir boy Chris Squire, the answer was yes. The band leaders found a guitarist, Steve Howe, and scored a hit album. But there was still one star missing from the galaxy of yes.
I got together with John and I said, well, there's this guy that's becoming big in England. There's this hotshot keyboard player. Maybe we should get him, you know.
With Rick Wakeman on board, the band went stratospheric. The following two albums sold millions.
Testifying, mutilated, armies gather near.
But for the next album, John decided he wanted to record in the country. In the woods. In a tent. Blimey.
Steve and Chris wanted to record in town, so we had a compromise. And the compromise that we would be in town, but try and make it countrified.
So the escapism we needed was to convert the studio into sort of a barnyard look.
There was little white trellis fencing all round all of the equipment, like little paddocks.
There was these like wooden chickens, like just, you know, two-dimensional wooden chickens laying.
There was a cardboard cut-out cow with an electronic udder.
Farmyards in the studio. The next thing we'll be telling you is that Steve Howe bought a seat for his guitar on Concorde.
I bought seats for my guitar because it is so important to me. It is unique. It is possibly the best guitar in the entire world.
There was an airline recently when I wanted to do this that actually wouldn't allow me. I changed airlines because they wouldn't allow me to buy a ticket in the name of somebody who wasn't a human being. I mean, we had Mr. Guitar or Mr. Gibson or, you know, I thought of Mr. G. Ibsen. You know, I thought that was quite good. Do all these things? No. Has he got a passport? No. And what I do now is I buy 2 economies as opposed to a business.
With Mr. G. Ibsen safe and sound, Yes presented a double album based on the autobiography of a yogi, with a single song on each side. Ah, the concept album.
And Rick particularly was not a fan of what we were doing at all. He thought it was definitely too spacey.
I just went around saying this is crap.
In '74, Wakeman, done up like a goldfish, left the band to pursue solo projects. And he wasn't going to be outdone by Yes's Flashing Lobster stage set.
Found Chris Welch in the Melody Maker, a Melody Maker office where I took him to the Red Lion pub and said, hey, guess what? I'm doing some concerts at King Arthur. And he said, yeah, I heard about that. I said, I'm doing them on ice. I thought, what can I throw in as well just to get people really riled up? I said, and I'm going to have real horses on ice. We never had real horses. Where Brent Council came round with the RSPCA and all I had was people on hobby horses going round. It was absolutely hilarious.
As was Rick's return to Yes. It was summer, the ice had melted, and he was just in time for a hit single. By the start of the 80s, the chill had returned, and both Anderson and Wakeman quit the band. No singer, no keyboard player, drastic action was called for. Buggles' electro-pop pioneers, Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes, were unlikely replacements for Anderson and Wakeman. Trevor thought so too.
He always says to me he sometimes wakes up still having the nightmare of him and I sitting in the back of the limo going to Madison Square Garden and me being like the coach saying, don't worry, son, you can do it. It'll be all right. It'll be all right.
And a couple of the English audiences were brutal, and they were calling for John.
The call was answered when Anderson returned in 1983 to record the 90125 album.
John came in and sang on it, and it was a monster, monster hit album. And that saved Yes's life.
Is this the live show? Wait a minute. Hey, you guys! Live TV. Hey, I'll see you later. We're going on stage live. Can you imagine this?
Since 1987, Anderson and Squire have split up, taken out injunctions, reformed, doubled up and watched Wakeman leave again. But the love affair continues.
Cheerio.
So another break looms like a giant mechanized armadillo on a devastated plateau. For 3 short Earth minutes, adieu. Welcome back to an era when elves were elves and sleeves were gatefold. Imagine, if you will, a scene with a Blackpool careers officer circa 1965. Ah, Anderson, come in, come in. So, you wish to play 2 flutes at once, dance around on one leg, dress as a tramp, and thereby become one of the world's leading salmon farmers. Stupid boy. What you need is a codpiece.
Yes, I took to the codpiece. It was a sort of a kind of a demi-bra for men. Really, I mean, it was exactly the same purpose, just to sort of create a pleasing, but not too sort of obvious shape. A certain amount of uplift and control, and you know what a bouncing boy needs when dressed in tights on stage.
Still codpieces were but a dream to a young blues band from Blackpool who, in 1968, played to Ina Sharples and a few thousand others as they supported the Pink Floyd in Hyde Park. Jethro Tull had arrived. Even the French liked them.
Qu'un groupe très original, les Jethro Tull.
Or Jimi Hendrix used their guitars.
Mad as it sounded and looked, progressive flute rock stormed the charts both here and in the States.
And later insisted your feelings were true.
This was 69, 70, the drug culture, and everybody thought that Ian was completely, you know, the most drugged out person that they'd ever seen on stage possible.
How on earth did people get that idea?
I haven't actually done the thing, or the things that people popularly term drugs.
Thank goodness for that. Ian's anti-drugs and anti-fashion stance also went for the rest of the band.
Most nights, all these sort of bags of dope would get thrown up on the stage, and we'd sort of wander over to them and look down our noses and kick them off the stage.
No drugs. Next thing you know, there'll be no concept album.
The album Aqualung was perceived widely to be a concept album, and I said emphatically at the time, and still maintain to this day, that 3 or 4 songs do not a concept album make.
But everyone else thought that 3 or 4 songs do a concept album make. So Anderson took his revenge.
We'll give them the mother of all concept albums. We'll come up with something that's really preposterous. And make it, 40 minutes of continuous music with a number of themes and reprises of themes, etc., etc.
Ah, the comedy concept album.
And I thought everybody's going to get the gag. No problem here. They'll see this as being a little bit of a satire, a little bit of a send-up of the whole concept album idea, and just treat it as, a fairly light-hearted bit of fun.
Saw you ride yourselves over the fields.
But not everybody got the joke. Thick as a Brick went to #1 in the States. Tull were officially huge and continued in much the same vein for the next couple of decades, selling out stadiums, winning Grammys, and even stopping off for a quick Christmas single. And a hey nonny nonny to you too, good sir. So, when you've got more flutes than you can shake a metal stick at, what do you spend the money on? Sex, drugs, rock and roll? No. This is Jethro Tull. Salmon farming. Rock star buys Scottish estate, becomes lord of the manor and sells fish to Sainsbury's. Textbook stuff. The band has also been big business for Anderson. Since 1967 there have been 30 different members. He's had 6 top 10 albums, 5 hit singles, and even played a central role in ousting a Central American dictator.
The Vatican has called the United States an occupying power in Panama. It said that the US government had no right to demand the handing over of the ousted military leader, General Manuel Noriega, who sought refuge in the Vatican embassy in Panama City.
American troops have turned to psychological tactics to wear down General Noriega. The embassy is being barraged with heavy rock music from loudspeakers.
Too Old to Rock and Roll, Too Young to Die was blasted at sort of 120 dB or whatever at Noriega when he was hiding out.
Married with 3 kids, about the river.
So let that be a lesson to dictators everywhere. Even now we hear that General Pinochet is being subjected to topographic oceans. Anderson, meanwhile, continues to launch Prog missiles from his patented Viagra flute.
It's okay for me to take the mickey out of Jethro Tull, or for me to take the mickey out of my own performance, but anybody else tries it, they get a punch on the nose.
In the beginning there was form but no concept. Bands just played the blues, and Prog was still the tiny whisper on the threshold of a dream. But our next turn changed all that.
The Moody Blues, born in Birmingham, destined for outer space. So was this. The Moodies started life as an R&B band, but split after one hit. Then immediately reformed with a new singer, their original bass player, a new attitude and a new look.
And I think one of the parts of being able to make your own music was to dress exactly how you felt.
The grooving Italian waiter look was all the rage as the boys enjoyed the delights of London. But they were about to turn the world prog with their first album.
The record company thought we were going to do a version of Dvorak's New World Symphony. And as soon as we got in there, we basically locked the doors and said, we're going to do our stuff.
Days of Future Past was the first time that an album had been made, you know, with an orchestra, with no breaks. It was continuous music, continuous.
Ah, the first concept album, about a day in the life of us all, and featuring a classic song that would be a hit on 3 separate occasions. But what could have inspired young men from the West Midlands to conceptualise so freely? 3 little letters, L, S and D.
4 of us dropped a tab together for the very first time. We did it as friends, and Mike, Ray, Graham and myself went on a psychedelic journey, I suppose from the beginning of 1967, that influenced our lives very much.
Watch out, the waiter's on us.
I think it opened us up to the lifestyles of indigenous people all around the world, and what their you know, so-called medicine men were really all about.
Why do we never get an answer when we're knocking at the door?
In the 1970s, the Moody's rode a permanent wave of success. Their hold on the charts as firm and uncompromising as Justin's Hairspray.
By 1974, we had 5 albums in the US charts all in 1 week, and I don't think anyone's ever done that. We charted a 707 to fly us around. We had a string of record shops, and we'd been working non-stop, and every album had gone platinum, and we'd stopped talking to each other.
The Moody's split in 1974, but by the end of the decade had returned older and bigger than ever. Today, it seems the Moody's, like Justin's Hair, will always be with us. In fact, they go from strength to strength. They've retained their crazy fashion sense, acquired an orchestra, and NASA have just released their greatest hits. Honest.
Hoot Gibson, who was their chief astronaut at NASA, he came to see us and told us officially that it had been on all of these missions and had done all of these million miles around the Earth.
Right, how's that tape recorder? Is the RPM up to nominal? Yeah, it works pretty good here at 0G. It works better than it does down here on the ground.
Nice.
Time for another ad break. Sell out, man.
Welcome back to the final leg in our journey to the very centre of progressive rock. The English public school system has long provided us with many great traditions. Cold showers at dawn, tuck feasts after evensong, forbidden love in the dorm, the instilling of an almost unassailable smugness, and of course putting a giant flower on your head and calling yourself Raoul.
What is your chosen specialised subject for the final?
Genesis, the rock band.
Clear up. Well, you have 2 minutes on Genesis, the rock band, starting... Now, at which school did the original members of Genesis first meet?
Charterhouse.
Correct.
In the beginning, while still at public school, a trio of precocious young coves answering to the name of Banks, Gabriel and Rutherford cooked up a little concept album. The entire Bible, in 10 songs.
Never been short of ambition. And yeah, you could say the Bible in 40 minutes was a little over the top.
Unfortunately, it was remaindered in the religious bin, and so, hanging up their mortarboards and gowns, they went on the road in 1970.
One college promoter, sort of, I think referred to us as snotty-nosed little bastards.
We had a roadie, and he used to like making great big hampers, and in fact became quite a sort of, on the road. Other groups were quite jealous of us. We'd become as a sport band with a great hamper full of stuff and sausages and stuff coming out of this, and they were sort of having to I don't know what they were living off.
The original drummer left after he passed the port the wrong way at dinner, so they auditioned this young tyke. He was slightly older at the time.
We went to the back garden where there was a swimming pool, and there was a piano on the patio, and Mike Rutherford appeared in the smoking jacket and slippers, and I thought, this is great, this is strange as well.
Due mainly to Peter Gabriel's Dali-esque mullet, which joined the classic coiffures of the rest of the band on a barnstorming tour of Italy, now their biggest fan base. But Gabriel's shoe and stage antics were making the new boy nervous.
He just started to do things, because again there was a lot of instrumental passages where nothing happened.
So I then evolved this thing of telling stories between the songs.
Old Michael continued to rub his flesh into the ground. It was perhaps Jerusalem boogie, but to the birds it meant supper is ready.
In 1972, they invented a prog phenomena, the concept song. Supper's Ready, a 23-minute novella.
People always think we set out to always write great epic songs. We didn't. Writing long songs is actually much easier than writing short songs.
But there were worried whispers when a first hit single came in at only 4 minutes. Had they forsaken prog? Oh no.
A flower?
People at that time, you know, they hadn't seen anyone dressing up in that way with music, and it was disturbing.
But not as disturbing as Gabriel wearing a pair of jeans and calling himself Rail for their 1974 album, which was about a parallel universe in New York. We think. Had he forsaken prog again? Oh no. But Gabriel's singing Hemorrhoid proved unpopular with the rest of the band.
It was at that point we felt that perhaps the whole thing had gone a little bit too far that way. But it just started to take over. And there wasn't a single review that really talked about anything apart from the way it looked.
So mid-tour Gabriel left, taking his lumpy prog bum grate with him. The dressing-up cupboard was bare, and Collins took over.
The audience, you know, had been used to this maniac running around, coming out of big phallic tubes and all this kind of slipper man costume, and I thought, well, they're going to get his knee, you know. A terrible disappointment.
Am I wrong to believe in the Cynthia Gold?
The smallest man in prog resorted to wearing furry moon boots and dressing as a gnome as the band changed direction.
The audience was a lot of long greatcoats, fishing hats and albums under the arm saying, "All right, Phil!" You know, that kind of thing. Never a woman in sight, unless she had a long greatcoat with albums under her arm as well.
And then suddenly we had a hit with Follow You, Follow Me. And all these guys who'd been trying to bring their girlfriends, who all went, "No, I don't know that band," they suddenly said, "Hang on, Doris, this is that song you like."
Let's get over here and see the lovely Genesis plant. Now, if you see over here, he's got a lovely little bits of growth over here. It's an ugly little brute. Yes, it's an ugly little brute, yes. Have a look at that there.
Hit songs, girls at concerts, kids' TV. This isn't prog.
We just thought, fuck it, let's sell out. I'm tired of defending the fact that we wrote 3 or 4 minute songs and had a bit of success, you know.
There was never a dance element to their music, but Genesis still became the poppest band in prog. And then there were the solo sidelines. Phil tossed off a chart topper. Mike and his band of tools powered to the top as well. While Tony chased sheep with a fish on a bike. In 1996, Phil packed up his drum kit and went solo for good.
I always thought that as long as the majority of the members of the original Genesis are still in the band, there would always be the Genesis thing. And with Tony and Mike still being there, albeit with another man singing, the spirit of Genesis for the true Genesis fan would still be there.
But it wasn't. After one album, Rutherford Banks and the other bloke called it a day.
Love us or hate us, we were certainly unique.
flower.
Before we unveil the undisputed kings in the court of Prog, let's take a fond look back through the swirling mists of time at those other caped crusaders.
Faithful, sure-footed, slightly smelly, Camel at 10. Give me gin and tonic, he was Frippatronic, King Crimson at 9. Now this was Acid House, Hawkwind at 8. At 7, Canadian Lumber Rock, Rush. Cooey, Mr. Shifter, ELP at 6. 5 are a boy band, oh yes. Is that a flute in his codpiece? Jethro Tull at 4. Jesus, he's back. The Moody Blues at 3. And at 2, it's Posh Prog, Genesis.
And now we come to the top of Prog's Premier League, the grandest in the glittering pantheon of proggerati. A 3-decade odyssey featuring drugs, psychosis, giant inflatable pigs, racing cars, implausibly large crumpets, and a breakup that makes the fragmentation of the Eastern Bloc look chummy and good-natured.
The Pink Floyd. You're going to hear them in a minute, and I don't want to prejudice you. Hear them and see them first, and we'll talk about them afterwards.
Oh, Pink Floyd. Now then, Pink Floyd. Were they prog rock?
Perhaps I'm a little bit too much of a musician to fully appreciate them. They have an audience, and people who have an audience ought to be heard. Perhaps it's my fault that I don't appreciate them.
The best album, other than the Beatles' Red One and Blue One, and never mind the bollocks, is The Wall.
All in all, you're just another brick in the wall.
I grew up smoking fucking pot, eating magic mushrooms, listening to that. I know every word of every song, all in the correct order, and I could sing it to you fucking right now if you put it on the CD player. I'd have to be drunk though.
Hey, teacher, leave them kids alone.
This is The Wall, a despicable album by the Pink Floyd. Proved very popular because of the imagery of Joel's scarf. And probably marked the death of prog rock.
So who were the architects of progressive rock's destruction? Funnily enough, a bunch of architectural students from the class of '65. Roger Waters, Nick Mason, Richard Wright, and Roger's mate Sid, who decided to form a band.
The Pink Floyd, once called the Underground's House Orchestra. On Friday nights, they and other groups play at UFO, UFO, unidentified flying object.
Sid Barrett was the center of the group in those days, and he had a great voice, and he was a great guitar player. Roger Waters and Nick Mason were a great and very unusual rhythm section. Roger was a really original bass player.
They were the hippest band on the psychedelic scene. Their first single, about a bloke who dressed in women's clothes, was a hit. But all the success was too much for Sid.
I think the fame and fortune aspect was something he really found very hard to cope with. Combine that with, you know, loads of acid, and it was a sort of nasty combination.
Sid left the band in 1968 after taking a trip too far. Roger brought in another mate, guitarist Dave Gilmour. They were still playing Sid's ditties, but Roger had other ideas.
Instead of it being the sort of childlike sort of gnomes and pixies type aspect that Sid had, it became that much sort of more grandiose and structured thing that Roger had.
Set the controls for the heart, the sun.
Roger's style took them to the top of the charts and to a whole new way of recording together, separately.
Roger Waters
was backstage, and I heard them all discussing who was going to be the next one in the studio the next day. And I said to them, what, you don't go in the studio all together? And they looked at me like, no, we go in one at a time. It saves arguments.
Have you altered your tone controls, Dave?
No.
Have you altered your volume control?
I don't think so. Why? What's different?
Separately, independently, and yet together, the Floyd set about recording the album that would make them prog superstars. Well, if anyone would let Roger record his bit.
Can I put this down?
Just a second, I still got to finish the other track.
Okay.
Thankfully, they let Roger put his bit down, and they recorded Dark Side of the Moon, a conceptual pie of emotional breakdown, fear, pessimism and death. Result, 28 million copies sold, 15 years in the US charts, and the third largest selling album of all time.
When Dark Side of the Moon came out, I loved that, and I painted the prism on my wall, and on my school bag, my shoes. I went and bought a prism. It just became an obsessive thing. I had to have prisms and shine torches through them.
And hit albums kept on coming. By 1977, the boys were thinking big, and thinking pig. A big pig, above Battersea Power Station, secured by a piece of string, on the front of an album.
The pig suddenly broke away from its mooring and sailed away. And there it was, sailing up into the sky, this massive 40-foot-long pig. Airline pilots were reporting seeing a flying pig. Air traffic control had to change all the routing of aircraft in southeast England for fear of this unidentified flying pig.
How do you follow that? The concept album to end all concept albums. Waters' tribute to the benefits of education was recorded under the usual conditions.
I mean, the experience drove me to near madness. You know, there's a lot of speculation about the fascistic imagery within the wall, whether that's an expression of Roger and who and what he is, and, you know, all I can say is, oh, yes.
The Wall marked the end of Pink Floyd as a builders' cooperative. An album later, they'd split. Nick Mason and Dave Gilmour taking the Pink Floyd name, and Roger his wall.
Another wall is perhaps the last thing that the city of Berlin needs, but that's what it's getting. 200 yards wide and 30 yards high, made of styrofoam. The largest, most ambitious rock concert ever.
Waters, the most successful hod carrier in the world, performed the multi-million-pound show before 200,000 people, and we've spared no expense to bring you a reconstruction of that very night.
I'm going to now try and knock the wall down with a piece of fish. See if it happens. Are you ready?
Two middle-aged British rock stars have turned out to have more pulling power than any other act in America. In concert ticket sales, Pink Floyd have outsold Michael Jackson, Madonna and Bruce Springsteen.
Yes, without Roger, the most argumentative band in Prog survived to record two of the biggest selling albums of the 80s and 90s. And these days they concentrate on solo projects, like racing cars, baking giant crumpets, and resting on their royalties.
Okay.
So there you have the saga that was progressive rock. But what now for these noble minstrels? Are they gone forever? Perhaps. Some would say that the Knights of Prog will return when the charts are in direst need, when danger lurks from preening boy men, screeching harpies, prancing infidels. But hark, is that a mellotron I hear?
A gentle rain pours softly on my weary eyes, as if to hide a lonely tear. My life will be...
Tony's protecting his territory next tonight. We're toughing it with the Sopranos in a matter of moments.